When everyone believed she was just the help, the black maid lay on the floor, exhausted, 5 newborns asleep on her chest. He walked in, ready to fire her. But unknown to him, she was the only reason they were still alive. They called him Hudson Vale, tech mogul, billionaire, reclusive widower. The kind of man who spoke in numbers, not feelings. His estate, Foxbridge Manor, perched high on a hill in upstate New York, was glass and steel, modern, sterile, and cold, just like him. It had everything: a private lake, an elevator in the foyer, a wine cellar larger than most homes. But it had never heard a lullaby, not until 5 babies arrived. Hudson had buried his wife, Delilah, the same day the quintuplets were born. 5 girls, a miracle by medical standards, a curse by emotional ones. Since then he hadn't held them, not once. He wrote checks, he hired nannies, he checked stock prices, but he never looked them in the eye. "I provide," he once said coldly to his assistant. "That's enough." It wasn't. Then there was Naomi Brooks. She was the quiet one in the background, a 32-year-old maid from Harlem who kept her head down and her voice lower. She didn't go to Ivy League schools, she didn't wear designer shoes, but she could calm 5 infants with nothing but her heartbeat. No one noticed Naomi at Foxbridge, not really. She came in early, left late, and had memorized each baby's cries like sheet music. She never complained, not when a new nanny quit mid-shift, not when diapers ran out, not even when 2 of the babies spiked fevers at once. She just kept going until her body gave out. That morning, Hudson had flown in from Tokyo, a 19-hour trip. He was irritated, jet-lagged, and emotionally shut down as usual. As he stepped into the house, silence greeted him. No staff rushing to greet him, no crying, no sound. Strange. He made his way through the marble hallway, briefcase still in hand. And then he saw them. There, under the massive crystal chandelier in the center of the living room, lay Naomi. On the floor, fast asleep. And on her chest, 5 tiny girls, swaddled in pink, each curled into her body like they had known her before birth. The soft rise and fall of her breath. A baby's hand clinging to her braid. One of them drooling peacefully on her collarbone, another with a tiny fist tucked against Naomi's cheek, and all of them quiet. Not a cry, not a cough, not a sound. Hudson froze. For a long time, he said nothing. His brain told him to be angry, that this was unprofessional, that the maid was asleep on the job, that 5 babies lying on the hardwood floor was unacceptable. But his heart, what was left of it, didn't move. He felt something ancient rise in his chest. Something that smelled like baby powder and sounded like laughter he hadn't heard in a year. He didn't know what to do with it. So, he did nothing. He just stood there, staring. He should have spoken, said something, anything. Instead, Hudson just stood there, his eyes pinned to the scene like he'd stumbled into someone else's memory. The maid, Naomi, still asleep. 5 tiny daughters draped over her like she was the only piece of earth they trusted. And in a way, she was. He stepped forward, slow. His $1,000 shoes tapped the polished floor quietly. The chandelier above scattered fractured light over their faces, hers calm, theirs weightless. Hudson swallowed. He hadn't seen them like this before, not together, not peaceful, not alive in the way that felt human. He had names for them, of course, names printed on monogrammed blankets and trust fund paperwork. But looking at them now, soft breathing, button noses, miniature fingers tangled in Naomi's t-shirt, he realized he didn't actually know which one was who. They knew her, but not him. A quiet voice inside whispered, "What if she hadn't been here?" The babies shifted in their sleep. Naomi stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open, and then she froze. Her gaze met his. First confusion, then panic. She sat up too quickly, carefully lifting the babies off her chest, placing them gently onto the soft blanket she must have spread hours ago. She was embarrassed, ashamed. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Vale," she whispered, voice still husky from sleep. "I didn't mean to. I was just trying to calm them down." The new nanny left at midnight. I didn't want them to wake up the house." Hudson didn't answer. His jaw tensed. She reached for the nearest baby, adjusting the wrap gently. Her fingers shook slightly. Exhaustion clung to her like sweat. "I laid down just for a second," she added, barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to fall asleep." He should have fired her right then. That was what he'd done before. Set standards, enforced boundaries, kept everything neat. But there was nothing neat about what he saw in front of him. Instead, he asked quietly, "How often does this happen?" Naomi blinked. "Sir." "This," he said, motioning to the blanket nest. "Sleeping here. Like this." She looked down, cheeks hot. "Only when there's no one else to help." Hudson said nothing. His gaze dropped to the smallest child, the one that looked like Delilah. Something cracked, quietly, internally. "If you're feeling this, even a little, don't scroll by in silence. Stories like this are real for someone. Subscribe, not for us, but for every invisible person who holds the world together while no one watches." He sat down. For the first time since the funeral, Hudson Vale sat on the floor of his own living room. He placed his briefcase beside him, loosened his tie, and stared at his children. Naomi froze, watching him carefully. He reached toward the nearest baby. She didn't stop him. Hudson's fingers trembled slightly as he scooped the baby into his arms, awkward, stiff. But the baby didn't cry. She stared at him with glassy blue eyes. He exhaled shakily. "This one is Aria," Naomi whispered, smiling despite herself. "She likes to be held upright. Helps her breathing." Hudson adjusted, unsure. The baby cooed, just once. That was the moment it began. Not loudly, not with a grand speech, but with a man who had everything finally realizing what he almost lost by not paying attention. Naomi stayed still, watching him hold his daughter. She didn't say it out loud, but in that moment, she was no longer the maid. She was the bridge. By the next morning, it was like nothing had happened. Naomi arrived to find the nursery scrubbed spotless. The babies moved back into their cribs and a strange chill in the air. Hudson was nowhere in sight. She blinked at the silence. After what happened the night before, the softness in his eyes, the way he held Aria, the way he sat on the floor beside her, something in her chest had shifted. She didn't expect a parade, but maybe a nod, a word. Instead, the house was stone-cold quiet. The new nanny had been replaced. Again. A stranger in crisp scrubs met her in the hallway, carrying a clipboard and referring to the babies as subjects A through E. Naomi's stomach sank. She had no rank here, no say. She'd crossed a line, hadn't she? Let her guard down, allowed herself to feel like she mattered in that moment. But she was just the maid again. Hudson watched from his office camera feed. He saw her walk in, pick up each baby with quiet grace, whisper to them, smile faintly. No fanfare, no audience, just care. He felt a knot in his throat. He hated that. He didn't know what to do with feelings that didn't have spreadsheets attached. "Sir," his assistant's voice broke through the intercom, "would you like me to speak to the agency about dismissing Ms. Brooks? We've had some complaints about her overstepping her duties." He paused. "No," Hudson said. "She stays." A beat of silence. "Should I inform her?" "No," he said again, colder this time. "Just let her work." The next time they crossed paths, it was brief. Naomi stepped out of the nursery carrying a laundry basket. Hudson was walking in with a bottle of imported formula. Their eyes met, just for a second. He nodded. She nodded back. Nothing more. No words. Just a silent wall between them. Later that night, Naomi sat alone in the staff lounge, head resting on her fist. The twins had colic. She hadn't eaten since breakfast. The new nanny had quit again. "I don't know what I'm doing here anymore," she whispered to herself. "They don't see me." But deep down, she knew they did. At least, he did. for a moment. And that scared her more than being invisible. In the West Wing, Hudson scrolled past a news headline about his latest acquisition. His photo, confident, polished, powerful. Everything in his empire was still intact, but he couldn't stop thinking about the way Arya had curled into him like she'd been waiting for him all along. He had felt her heartbeat, and that Maid, the one they called Nobody, had known how to hold 5 fragile lives with one exhausted body. He didn't want to feel that again, because if he did, he'd have to admit what he'd missed. At this point, what do you think he should do? Follow his pride or follow his heart? Comment below with what you'd want him to say to her, if he had the courage. That night, Naomi tucked the babies into their cribs, one by one. "Good night, my girls," she whispered. "Mama Naomi's still here." And for now, that had to be enough. The storm hit just after midnight. Upstate winds howled through the trees like wild animals. Rain slammed against the windows. The power flickered, then died completely. Foxbridge Manor fell into darkness. Naomi jumped as the lights went out in the nursery. The white noise machine clicked off. One baby stirred, then another. Within seconds, a chorus of crying echoed through the halls. She moved fast, flashlight already in hand. Candles from the emergency kit were lit one by one, casting a soft golden glow over the room. But the babies were unsettled, confused by the sudden dark, their routine shattered. And then, Arya coughed. A sharp, high-pitched cough that made Naomi freeze. She touched her forehead, burning hot. Then Tessa, then Lila. Within minutes, 3 of the 5 babies were feverish, sweaty, crying, inconsolable. Naomi's hands shook. No, 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 not now. She reached for her phone. Dead. The landline? Also out. And the estate was so far out, even a whisper couldn't escape the trees. She had no choice. She ran. Hudson had just poured a whiskey by flashlight in his study when he heard the footsteps. Fast, urgent. Then the knock. He opened the door. Naomi stood there, soaked from the rain between wings, hair damp, eyes wide with panic. "They're sick," she said. 3 of them, high fevers. Arya's struggling to breathe. His heart stopped. They moved as one after that. Naomi showed him how to prepare the emergency saline packs from the cabinet. Hudson, strangely composed, held Lila as Naomi rocked Arya. They worked in silence, focused, afraid, united. The candles flickered as they moved between cribs. Naomi whispered lullabies. Hudson checked the thermometer with trembling hands. Arya's breathing slowed eventually. The fever dipped just slightly. The crying stopped. It was almost dawn when Hudson sank into the nursery armchair, hair tousled, shirt wrinkled. Naomi sat cross-legged on the rug, arms still gently wrapped around the smallest child. Quiet. Then, "Why didn't you tell me?" Hudson asked softly. She looked up. "That you've been doing this alone." Naomi hesitated. "You never asked." He nodded, eyes low. "You hold them like they're yours," he said after a moment. "I don't have any of my own," she replied, her voice barely audible. A beat passed. The words hung there, raw. He watched her, this woman who had no wealth, no power, but carried 5 lives every night without complaint. "I didn't want to get attached," Hudson admitted. Naomi's gaze met his. "But you did," she said. He nodded once. "I think I already was." Naomi stood, brushing her knees off. "The power should come back soon. I'll stay with them till it does." Hudson looked at her. Really looked. He saw something fierce beneath the fatigue. Not just strength, but love. "You shouldn't have to do it alone," he said quietly. "I've been doing a lot of things alone," she replied. Hudson reached for a blanket and spread it over her as she sat beside the crib. She didn't thank him. She didn't have to. For the first time, they weren't on opposite sides of a glass wall. They were in this, together. By morning, the power returned. The storm had passed, but something else lingered in the nursery air, something softer. Hudson had stayed the night. Not in his king-sized bed, not in the West Wing study, but right there on the floor, curled beneath a cashmere throw, one eye always drifting toward the cribs. Naomi brewed coffee in the kitchen, her uniform still damp from last night. She didn't expect him to come downstairs, but he did. Shirt wrinkled, hair unkempt, no entourage, just him. He looked human. They stood in silence for a moment, steam rising between them from ceramic mugs. Then he asked the question he hadn't dared to until now. "Naomi, why do you know so much about babies?" She hesitated. Hudson saw the shift in her eyes. A flicker of hesitation. Pain. "I had a son," she said finally. The words came out like glass. Hudson straightened slightly, surprised. She swallowed. "I was 19. His name was Micah. He only lived 7 months." A long pause. "He had a heart defect. Doctors missed it at first. By the time they caught it, he was already fading." Hudson said nothing. No pity, just presence. Naomi looked down. "I used to fall asleep with him on my chest, just like I did last night. It was the only way he'd sleep." She exhaled slowly. "After he died, I couldn't be in the apartment anymore. I took the first job I could get. Cleaning houses, working nights. Anything to keep from remembering." Hudson felt something shift deep inside his chest. "How long ago was that?" he asked quietly. 13 years, she said. "I'm sorry." Naomi looked up at him. "You don't have to be. I don't tell anyone. Most people just see a maid who works too hard." "I don't," Hudson replied. She tilted her head, half smiling. "No? I see a woman who saved my children." Later that afternoon, Hudson stepped into the hallway outside the nursery. He stood by the wall, watching Naomi through the open door. She held Tessa now, rocking her gently in the armchair, humming something wordless, her voice barely a whisper. He turned to leave, then noticed a folded paper sticking out from Naomi's worn leather purse by the changing table. Something about it caught his eye, not out of snooping, more instinct. He glanced once more toward Naomi, then back at the paper. It was a letter from a social worker. Placement denied due to income instability and prior trauma diagnosis. Application for foster care has been closed. Hudson blinked. Naomi had tried to adopt. Recently, she had wanted a child, still did, and the system said no. His heart clenched. She had lost her own son, given everything to his daughters, and yet the world still saw her as less. He folded the letter gently, slid it back. Didn't speak of it, but something inside him cracked open. The next few days were different, not in a way anyone could measure, but you could feel it. Hudson showed up, every morning, every night, not with money, not with rules, but with presence. He learned how to hold bottles at the right angle, how to change diapers without looking like he was performing heart surgery. He read the bedtime stories, stumbling through them, monotone at first, but the girls didn't seem to mind. Naomi noticed the way he sat cross-legged on the nursery rug now, asking softly, "Which one is this?" Noticed how the babies started recognizing his voice, how Arya turned her head every time she heard him speak. "You're getting better at this," she teased one night, watching him gently bounce Camille in his arms. "Don't patronize me," he replied dryly, but his smile gave him away. That night, the babies fell asleep earlier than usual. The house was quiet. Naomi stepped outside onto the small garden terrace just off the east wing. The moon spilled silver light across the hedges. She sat on the bench, sipping tea from a chipped mug she refused to replace. Hudson joined her. He didn't ask permission, just sat. They watched the wind stir the trees. And for once, the silence wasn't heavy. It was warm. "You know," he said, breaking the stillness, "Delilah would have liked you." Naomi turned toward him, surprised. "She was loud," he added with a half-smile. "Big laugh, bigger opinions. Didn't care what anyone thought. She would have hired you as the CEO of this household after 5 minutes." Naomi chuckled. I don't know about that. I do, he said. A pause. She made me softer. Then she left, and I hardened up. I didn't know how to hold 5 babies and a broken heart at the same time. Naomi didn't speak, just listened. That was enough. He looked over at her. You were right, by the way. About what? I did get attached. She smiled. That makes 2 of us. The next morning, something shifted. Hudson arrived in the nursery first. He made the bottles, fed the girls, sang badly off key until they giggled. When Naomi walked in, she stopped in the doorway, quietly watching him dance clumsily with Tessa in his arms. He caught her watching. What? He said, playing it cool. Nothing, she said. Just proud of you. He raised an eyebrow. You're proud of me. I've seen billionaires build cities, Naomi said, walking over, but I've never seen one learn how to rock a teething baby on 2 hours of sleep. He chuckled, handing her a burp cloth. They moved around the room like co-pilots now. No instructions needed, no fear between them. If this is the kind of love you believe in, the kind that's slow, quiet and hard-earned, subscribe. Not just for the story, but for the feeling you're carrying right now. Let it stay with you. That night, as they tucked the girls into bed, Naomi reached out and adjusted Hudson's collar. You've got spit up on your tie, she teased. He looked down, then laughed. It was the first time she'd ever heard him really laugh. And something about that sound made her eyes sting. Not from sadness, from the beauty of watching a man come back to life. The trouble started with a knock at the door, not the nursery door. Naomi had just finished bathing the girls when she heard it, sharp, urgent. She peeked through the curtains. A woman in heels, designer bag, red lipstick. She didn't recognize her, but Hudson did. Veronica. He said the name like a curse. Veronica stepped inside without invitation. Tall, blonde, cold. The PR agent who had once handled Hudson's public image after Delilah's death. The same woman who whispered in his ear during press conferences and funerals. She glanced around. So this is your new life? Hudson didn't answer. Naomi stood in the hallway, invisible again. Veronica smirked. You've gone completely off-grid, you know that? Investors are asking questions. Board's nervous. You're playing house while your empire teeters. It's stable, Hudson muttered. Not from where I'm standing, she snapped. You're emotionally compromised. You're letting a maid play mother to your children. Stop. His voice was quiet but sharp. Veronica folded her arms. Look, I get it. She's convenient, warm, maybe even makes you feel something again. But when this hits the press, she leaned in. Do you really think they'll let your daughters stay in your custody when they find out your full-time childcare is a grieving Harlem housekeeper with a trauma diagnosis? Naomi heard every word. She didn't move, didn't cry, just turned back toward the nursery. She didn't wait for Hudson to defend her. She didn't need to. She had heard what she needed to hear. When Hudson found her later, she was packing. Where are you going? He asked, panicked. I don't know, she said quietly, but I can't stay. Naomi, listen. I heard her, she whispered. Every word. She doesn't matter, he said. You do. Then why didn't you say that? Her voice cracked. Hudson stepped forward. I didn't want to make things worse. Naomi held up her hand. You let her reduce me to my worst pain, and you didn't say a word. Silence. You think I'm doing this for a job? She said, tears in her eyes. Those girls are my heartbeat, but I will not stay where I'm a liability. You're not, he said. Then prove it, she whispered. Not with money, not with words, with truth. He couldn't. Not in that moment, because part of him still lived in the world Veronica built, where image mattered more than truth, and part of him was still afraid. So Naomi left. She didn't slam the door. She didn't cry in front of the babies. She just kissed each one goodbye, quietly, one by one, and walked out. Hudson sat alone in the nursery that night, surrounded by 5 sleeping miracles. But this time, there was no one to show him what to do. He stared at the empty rocker. and for the first time since Delilah's death, he wept. The nursery was too quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't feel peaceful, just empty. Hudson stood by the window, arms crossed, staring out into the grey sky over Foxbridge Manor. The babies were asleep, but he hadn't slept at all. He hadn't heard Naomi's voice in 2 days. No one laughed in the hallways. No one sang lullabies off-key while folding onesies. The new nanny they brought in stayed silent, clinical, the kind of woman who timed feedings with a stopwatch and never once held a baby for comfort. It felt like a hospital, not a home. He walked into the nursery and sat on the rug, alone. No Naomi to guide him, no map for what to do now. He picked up Aria, gently. She fussed for a second, then laid her head against his shoulder. He whispered softly, "She used to hold you like this, didn't she?" The baby cooed. He closed his eyes. He remembered the letter, the one from the social worker, the one that said Naomi didn't qualify to adopt. He remembered her eyes when she said, "They're my heartbeat." He remembered how he said nothing when Veronica reduced her to a file in a system that never saw her heart. Hudson Vale had lost his wife. He'd almost lost his daughters. And now, he had lost Naomi. And somehow, that hurt the most. Somewhere across town, Naomi sat alone in a studio apartment barely big enough for her thoughts. She still had the baby blanket Aria always kicked off in her bag. She hadn't had the heart to return it. She ran her fingers over the edge of the fabric. She thought about going back, but the voice in her head whispered, "You're just the help. You don't belong in his world." He let her speak, and he said nothing. She shook her head, tears rising again. But then, she remembered the look on his face when he held the baby for the first time. The way he started reading bedtime stories with shaky hands. The way he showed up. Changed. He had grown. And maybe he just didn't know how to fight for her. Yet. That night she opened her phone. She still had his number saved under Mr. Vale. Her finger hovered over the screen. She typed, "I didn't want to leave like that, but I had to. For me." Then deleted it. Then typed again, "The girls are lucky to have you now. Just don't forget to hum when they cry. They like the sound more than the song." She hovered again, then hit send. Back at the manor, Hudson's phone buzzed. He saw the name. His heart flipped in his chest. He read the message once, then again. He stood. No hesitation. He didn't know what he was going to say, but he knew he couldn't stay silent anymore. It was just before sunrise when Naomi heard the knock. 3 soft taps. She hadn't ordered food, hadn't told anyone where she lived except. She opened the door. Hudson stood there. No suit, no assistant, no mask. Just Hudson, holding a tiny pink sock in his hand. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "She kicked this off yesterday. I think she wanted to make sure I found you." Naomi stared at him, eyes already welling. "I didn't come to convince you," he added. "I came because you were right. I didn't fight for you. I let someone else define your worth. I didn't stand up when it counted." She didn't say anything. Just let the silence breathe. "I'm not used to this," he said, "but I want to learn, if you'll still let me." She opened the door wider. He stepped inside. Back at Foxbridge Manor, the babies were just waking. Hudson entered the nursery first. Naomi followed quietly. The girls lit up the moment they saw her. Tiny arms reached, smiles bloomed. Even Aria let out a giggle. Naomi picked her up. "Hey, baby, Mama Naomi's back." Hudson stood beside her, watching them with something new in his eyes. Not fear, not grief, peace. Later that day, a family court judge reviewed paperwork on her desk. She raised an eyebrow. "So, you want to name her co-guardian?" Hudson nodded. "Yes, officially." "She's not blood." "She's better," he said simply. "She's home." A week later it was quiet again. Same nursery, same chandelier. But this time the light wasn't harsh. It was warm, golden. Naomi lay on the floor, 5 sleeping girls curled against her like flower petals, and just like before, Hudson stood in the doorway, watching. But this time, he didn't freeze. He walked forward, laid down beside her, let his daughter's hand rest on his chest. Naomi turned her head toward him. "Still think I'm just the help?" He smiled. "Still think I'm just the billionaire?" They both laughed softly, so they wouldn't wake the girls. "Do you believe love can grow in the unlikeliest of places, between grief and forgiveness, silence and sacrifice? If this story moved you, tell us below, and if you haven't yet, subscribe. Not for the numbers, but for stories that remind us who we really are.